This story was nearly lost until someone whispered it to the flames. Pull up a log, take a seat, let the dark settle in. Because once the fire starts speaking, it doesn't stop. Some say the stories it remembers are just legends. Others say they happen exactly this way. But you'll have to decide for yourself. Tonight, the fire remembers monsters that didn't hide in the shadows. They hid behind curtains, family portraits, and locked cellar doors. These weren't strangers lurking in alleys. These were fathers, husbands, providers. They smiled in church pews. They sat at dinner tables, but behind closed doors. They became something else entirely. Welcome to Crimes the Flames Whisper. Monsters behind closed doors. Story 1. The Hidden Room. They say the worst monsters don't growl. They whisper. They don't bare their teeth. They smile. And in the quiet town of Amstetten, Austria, no one was watching the basement. Josef Fritzl was an engineer, a father of 7. By all appearances, just another retiree with a neat garden and a tucked-in shirt. His neighbors saw a strict but devoted family man. His wife, Rosemary, quiet and obedient. His children well-behaved. The kind of family who never caused trouble. But in 1984, something happened that would go unnoticed by the world for nearly a quarter of a century. Joseph's 18-year-old daughter, Elizabeth, vanished. Police searched. Posters went up. A letter appeared weeks later, supposedly from Elizabeth, claiming she'd run off with a cult. Authorities accepted it. And Joseph went back to his quiet life. But beneath his house, he'd built something no one could explain. A cellar, reinforced, soundproofed. A labyrinth of narrow corridors and tiny rooms, sealed by a hidden door behind a bookshelf. It required a code only he knew. And inside that dungeon, Elizabeth was chained. Joseph had been planning it for years. He began constructing the cellar in the 1980s, telling city officials it was a storm shelter. But he was careful. He built the walls thick, poured concrete himself, and installed multiple heavy doors. When Elizabeth tried to escape her father's abuse, he locked her in permanently. What happened inside that cellar is almost beyond comprehension. For 24 years, Elizabeth lived without sunlight, without windows, without hope. And in that darkness, Joseph visited her not as a father, but as a monster. She gave birth to 7 children in that basement. One died just days after birth. Joseph burned the body in a furnace. 3 of the children were removed as infants and raised upstairs by Joseph and his wife as foundlings, supposedly left on their doorstep. Rosemary never questioned it. The other 3 children lived in the cellar with Elizabeth, never knowing what sky looked like, what a park smelled like, or what freedom meant. They lived in filth, no medical care. Fluorescent lights controlled by a timer, food brought sporadically, noise forbiddance. The children were taught to whisper, to freeze when footsteps echoed above. It wasn't until 2008 that fate intervened. One of the cellar children, Kirsten, became critically ill. Elizabeth begged her father to take the girl to a hospital. For the first time in 24 years, Joseph agreed, but doctors were baffled. The girl's condition didn't match any known environment: malnutrition, lack of sunlight, strange speech patterns. The police launched an investigation. Joseph reluctantly allowed Elizabeth to visit the hospital, under the lie that she had reemerged from her cult. But once separated, she told the truth. Everything. When officers raided the Fritzl home, they were shocked to discover the secret dungeon, hidden rooms, a metal door, children who had never seen the outside world. The news exploded globally. Joseph was arrested and charged with murder, rape, enslavement, and false imprisonment. During trial, he showed no remorse. In 2009, he was sentenced to life in a psychiatric facility, but the scars remain. Elizabeth and her children were relocated, identities changed, lives rebuilt in secret. Their trauma can't be measured. The townspeople of Amstetten still walk by that house. It sits there empty. No one wants it. No one dares to tear it down. Because even now, they say, the basement remembers. Story 2. Father of Fear. Some monsters lock their secrets underground. Others just lock the front door and vanish. November 9th, 1971. The List family home in Westfield, New Jersey stood silent, curtains drawn, lights on around the clock. Day after day, neighbors noticed the oddity newspapers piling up, milk left untouched, but no one knocked. Not yet. Inside the grand 19-room mansion, the house was still. No voices, no footsteps, no signs of life. Except for the bodies. John Emil List was the picture of a family patriarch. A devout Lutheran, a World War II veteran, a father of 3. He wore thick glasses, a neatly trimmed mustache, and an expression that rarely shifted. Some called him stern. Others said he was just a product of his time. But John carried a weight no one saw, a mix of financial collapse, religious delusion, and a burning fear of humiliation. He had lost his job as a bank vice president, but he never told his family. Day after day, he left for work, only to sit in train stations, pretending. He withdrew savings, sold off his mother's jewelry, but it wasn't enough. The mortgage was unpaid, bills stacked high, and in John's mind, the math was simple. If he told the truth, they'd be poor. If he did nothing, they'd suffer. But if he saved them, he believed that killing his family would guarantee them a place in heaven. A warped theology rooted in fear, shame, and control. And so, that November morning, while the children were at school, and his wife Patricia sat drinking coffee in the kitchen, John retrieved 2 guns, his father's .22 pistol and his own 9mm. He shot Patricia once in the back of the head. She died instantly. Then he climbed to the 3rd floor and entered his mother, Alma's apartment. She was 84, a devout woman. He kissed her on the cheek, then shot her above the eye. She collapsed beside her teacup. Next, he waited. He made lunch, cleaned the kitchen, sat in silence. When his daughter Patricia, 16, and son John Jr., 15, came home from school, he killed them too. One after the other, precise, cold. But it was his eldest son, Frederick, who fought. John Jr. didn't die immediately. Neighbors later recalled hearing loud thuds, what they thought were renovations. It wasn't. It was a struggle. John shot his son 10 times before he stopped moving. Then, he dragged the bodies of his wife and children into the ballroom and laid them side by side on sleeping bags. He arranged their hands in prayer, covered their faces, played classical music on the intercom, and then he vanished. Before leaving, he turned down the thermostat, cut himself out of every family photo, wrote a 5-page letter to his pastor explaining why he had saved his family from what he called the corrupting influence of the world. He mailed the letter, canceled deliveries, and disappeared. It took nearly a month before police entered the house and discovered the bodies. The mansion echoed with rot. The lights had finally burned out, but the horror remained. John List became a fugitive, and for 18 years he lived undetected. Under the alias Robert P. Clark, he settled in Denver, worked as an accountant, remarried, went to church, even joined a civic theater group. No one suspected a thing. It wasn't until 1989 that America's Most Wanted featured a clay sculpture of what List might look like now. The bust, created by forensic artist Frank Bender, was so accurate. Even List's neighbor recognized him. He was arrested in Virginia, calm, composed. He denied everything at first, until the evidence spoke louder than he ever could. At trial, John claimed he was mentally ill at the time of the murders, that he truly believed he was sending his family to heaven. The court didn't agree. He was convicted of 5 counts of first-degree murder and sentenced to life in prison. He died behind bars in 2008. The List house was eventually demolished. In its place, a new home stands, but no family stays long. Some say the lights flicker at 9:00 a.m., the moment Patricia was killed. Others report hearing music echoing faintly from the walls, but maybe it's just the house remembering, or maybe it's the father still praying. Story 3. The Cult on the Hill. Some houses don't need locked doors or hidden basements. Sometimes the monster builds the altar in plain sight. In the heart of Fresno, California, stood a decaying, cluttered house, a broken-down bus in the yard. blackout curtains in every window, and the faint scent of rot that never quite left the air. Neighbors whispered about the man who lived there. He wore long robes like a prophet, carried a Bible the size of a tombstone, his beard stretched past his chest. And when he spoke, it was slow, measured, like every word was sacred. His name was Marcus Wesson, and behind that door was something that didn't belong to this world. Marcus grew up steeped in Seventh-day Adventist teachings, but twisted scripture into something of his own. He told those around him that God was black, that he himself was God's chosen vessel, and that he was destined to lead a new generation into heaven, a family reborn through bloodline and sacrifice. But his family was no accident. Wesson fathered at least 16 children, most of them by his own daughters, nieces, or grandchildren. He kept the women in the house like a harem, isolated, indoctrinated, and stripped of identity. They wore long black dresses. They weren't allowed to speak to outsiders. They homeschooled their children using Bibles and Marcus's handwritten gospel. He ruled through fear, beatings, starvation, and threats of eternal damnation. But he also built something more dangerous than just a household. He built a closed-loop religion. He called his daughters and nieces wives. He called the children vessels. And he called himself the Lord. When police finally arrived on the afternoon of March 12, 2004, it was because of a custody dispute. 2 of the women's former followers had returned with law enforcement to retrieve their children, but inside the house, chaos had already begun. When the officers knocked, Marcus stalled. He shuffled slowly to the door, kept them waiting. Minutes ticked by. Then they heard it. Gunshots. 5 shots in rapid succession. A pause. 4 more. When officers breached the house, they found a nightmare. In a back bedroom, 9 children were discovered, huddled together, all shot through the eye. Execution style with a .22 caliber revolver. Blood soaked the carpet. Bibles were scattered near the bodies. And in the center of it all was a child just one alive, cradled in the arms of one of the dead. Wesson emerged from a back room, covered in blood. He didn't run. He didn't cry. He looked at the officers and simply said, "They're gone." At trial, Wesson claimed the murders were part of a murder-suicide pact, that the women had agreed to it, that the oldest daughter, Sabrina, had pulled the trigger before turning the gun on herself. But jurors weren't convinced. The control Wesson held was absolute. Survivors testified that the children were beaten if they didn't pray to him, that he performed marriages with underage girls in candlelit ceremonies, that he sexually abused them for years, telling them it was God's will. One child's diary read, "If we are faithful and pure, Father will take us to the light. If we are wicked, he will take us to the dark." It took just over a month for the jury to convict Wesson on 9 counts of first-degree murder and 14 counts of rape and molestation. He now sits on death row in San Quentin, but the house, it was gutted, the bus removed, the walls repainted. But no one stays long. Locals claim the new owners hear children crying in the walls, that sometimes, late at night, a man in robes stands silently in the yard, holding a Bible upside down. Others say the house is cursed because when you kill in the name of God, even hell has rules. You listened. You stayed through the worst of it. And now the fire dies down just a little. But before it goes out, remember this. The scariest place isn't a haunted house. It isn't an empty forest. It's the house next door, the one with fresh paint, drawn blinds, and a monster inside who remembers to mow the lawn. These weren't ghosts. They weren't demons, they were real, and they lived behind doors we all walk past. The fire whispered tonight, and now it waits for what you'll do next. If you want more stories the world tried to bury, subscribe. And if the flame spoke to you tonight, leave a comment. Tell us what story haunted you the most. And if you want to help the fire grow, consider joining the Patreon links in the bio. The fire always remembers its true believers.